title of this lecture is the parallel postulate, and please, Victor, you have the floor.
Thank you. So today's talk will be on this very classical topic. You might wonder what's still to be said on this matter, which is rather old, perhaps as old as mathematics, almost. We'll see that there are even older things. I will talk about things that wouldn't exist if the Archimedean axiom is assumed. So, for those who believe that the natural world satisfies the Archimedean axiom, then most of this talk is about angels on a needle. But I explained last time why there is a problem with the Archimedean axiom, namely, it's not an elementary statement. And so let's see where it all starts here. Oh, something is that wouldn't allow this to move. Ah, now it moves. And this one, perhaps I can make it small. Yeah. Okay, great. Looks better, right? On your end. Okay, so how does it look like in Euclid, where it's the fifth postulate? It says that if a straight line falling on two straight lines makes the interior angles on the same side less than two right angles, the two straight lines, if produced indefinitely, there's a little ML there, meet on that side on which are the angles less than the two right angles. Well, what's happening here? Why don't we get the whole thing? Okay, perhaps this way will be better. So, the statement of the axiom involves a whole lot of things, right? I mean, we're told about side, we're told about the sum of two angles. So you should be able to do those things. And it was first observed in a very short note by Salvatore di Noi in 1949 that with this form of the parallel postulate, you don't need the Pasch axiom. If you wonder like why I'm not getting this book done, which I'm working on for like 24 years, it's because whenever I find such things in the literature, I try to make sense of them, and making sense of them leads to another paper, but definitely not to success with the book, which is the case with this one that I looked at thinking of, let's see if my bibliography all makes sense for the book. And so I looked at this again. And so I started working on it, and now I have a paper, but I have to write it and all these things. So that's how things work. So what's this? Why is it? So this thing that it doesn't fit exactly, is there a trick to do that? I think there is a control something. No, it doesn't do it. What's the trick to make it naturally the way it should be? F11, I think that was done already. It doesn't have the desired effect. I don't know how to do it smaller.
I'm sorry, Professor Pambuccian, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you perfectly.
Maybe it's better if you close the browser and open the slides with Acrobat.
I didn't know that this was a browser. Thank you.
Yeah, and also Pierluigi, can you make Marco co-host?
Okay, so let's see. Let's turn to this. Let's turn to desktop, Urbino, but it opens it again with this. That's the bad thing. You don't want that. Yeah. How do you make it so it opens it with something meaningful?
Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Ah, okay. Good. Perfect.
Twist. Yes.
Now we're perfect. Thank you.
Now we have to share. No. Okay. Okay.
Luigi, make also Marco co-host of
Marco
this.
is a cost.
Okay. Great. So let's move to where we were. Okay. So the statement involves several notions. A plane separation notion, because you need to know what the same side of this line is. Okay? The ability to add two angles and to compare angles, because you're told that the sum of those angles is less than two right angles. So you need to know how to compare those. Okay, so there are several primitive notions involved. One is betweenness, which it's a ternary predicate, which tells you that this point is between two others. The other is equidistance. You need to know when you're trying to add angles, how are you going to do it? Well, you have an angle here and you have someone here. Well, you need to be able to take this and move it there. How do you do that? Well, you need to know what congruence is, because you're going to create a little triangle here in this angle, and you're going to move this triangle over there. But for this to move things like this, you need to know what congruence is. So, in fact, as Minkowski has shown, this is all you need to express all of Euclidean geometry. So, to express Euclid's version, you need a rather rich language. And the talk today will be a lot about language and the way you express axioms and so on. It's mostly poetry. So, a first question that arises when you see this is, well, do I need all these notions, Because there is this, minimality idea. Can I do it with less? That goes back, to Aristotle or Occam or whatever you want to go back to. Now, Playfair, which actually didn't do much than restate what Proclus had already stated, tells us that if you're in a plane, then given a line and a point not on it, then at most one line parallel to the given line can be drawn through the point. As you see in this version, there is nothing involved except for incidence. All you need to know is a point is on a line or is not on a line. That's all. So it is remarkably better than the others because it doesn't require betweenness at all, and it doesn't require equidistance at all. So Proclus said the same thing in a bit different version, but it's the same. If a straight line intersects one of two parallels, it will intersect the other as well. So, as I said, these are pure incidence statements, and they can be expressed in terms of line intersection. So suppose in this language, so far I expressed everything as if there were only points in the world. Well, suppose there are lines in the world. Well, then you have a binary predicate of line intersection. So you can express this in terms of that. And it looks pretty simple. It says that if B and C intersect, think of B and C like this, then A, which is whatever other line you want, is intersected by either B or C. Not either, by one of B or C. You can express it also as a pure equidistance statement by saying that every triangle has a center of a circumscribed circle, which looks like this. Why does it look like that? The first part, the hypothesis, tells you that ABC is a triangle. And how do you say that? Well, you say this. If I have A and B here, then C is not on this line. If I can reflect it into the line AB, what does reflect mean? It means there is a point different from C, such that these AC and AD are congruent, and BC and BD are congruent. That's exactly what the hypothesis tells you. So if you're in that kind of a situation, then there exists a point O that is equidistant from all vertices. So as you see, this is a purely metric statement of it. You can also express it as a pure betweenness notion. Obviously, you may say, well, plane pairs can be expressed in pure betweenness, because I can say that 3 points are collinear if and only if one is between the other two. So it is a pure betweenness. So you can say this is another pure betweenness statement. Why I state it is because you'll see that it becomes really important later on. Through any point inside a given angle, there exists a line which intersects both legs of the angle. Legs meaning the rays that are formed by this angle. Yeah? So if this is the angle and you give me any point inside it, then I can find some line that intersects both of these. Now, all our talk today will have a background theory. The background theory is absolute geometry. The name comes from Janos Bolyai. And it is perhaps the most important notion in geometry. The idea that there is a part of geometry that has nothing to do with how parallels behave, and that is common to kind of any reasonable geometry, almost any reasonable. The elliptic one doesn't like these things, but except for that, it's going well. So, the language in which it is expressed is the one that you've already seen, that it has betweenness and equidistance. And the only variables are points. What are the axioms? This axiom tells you that, well, segment congruence is an equivalence relation, transitivity. If AB is congruent to PQ and AB is congruent to RS, then PQ is congruent to RS. This one tells you that if a segment is congruent to a degenerate one, then the original one is degenerate as well. So you don't have things like, special relativity kind of things where there are, non-degenerate segments that are congruent to degenerate ones. The next one tells you that the segment transport axiom holds, which means what? That you can take BC and lay it off on any ray you want from some point. Yeah? So you can take a segment and lay it off on any ray, transport it on a ray. The next one is the 5-segment axiom. That is Minkowski's invention of how do you say side angle side without talking about angles. You have a triangle ABC here, an identical one A prime, B prime, C prime. There is a point on the extension of BC, let's call it D. There is another point on the extension of B prime, C prime, let's call it D prime. That is at the same place, right? And so it's on this side, and the segments CD and C prime, D prime are congruent. B prime, sorry, I'm having here AB and C is up on top, right? AB, on the extension of AB, I have a D. Same thing happens in the prime world. Then you conclude that CD is C prime, D prime. What does it have to do with side angle side? Well, the triangle ABC and A prime, B prime, C prime are there just to tell you that the angle CBD and C prime B prime D prime are congruent by telling you that their supplements are congruent because those triangles are. Anyway, it's a side angle side, something that Euclid would have called superposition. Okay. The next axiom tells you that a point can't be between two identical points without being also identical to those two. Then you've got the Pasch axiom in a so-called inner form, which tells you that if you have 3 points like this, so this is between those, and another one with a situation like this, and you take the middle one with the external one here, and the external one here with the middle one here, then they intersect. So it's kind of a scissors here form. So you got two lines like this, and you join this with this, and this with that. Yeah. Those intersect. Yeah. So the traditional Pasch axiom is more generous. It tells you that if a line enters a triangle, then it exits it. Yes. I know, yeah, I could do some tricks here, right? I could do it here as well. I could do this, and I could show you beautifully how this works. Tick, tick, and here, tick, tick, and then this, and this intersect. Wonderful. That's what it says. It's called the inner form of the Pasch axiom, although the honor should go to Peano because he was the one who first stated it in this form. In fact, he stated both the so-called inner form as the outer form. Anyway, now there is a trick to just get rid of this. Anota, no, we got rid of the anota, and now there is realizzazione, no, controllo. Oh, there's an eraser. Yeah, let's look at the eraser. It's down here somewhere, or what? Up, I don't see it. I see anota, check. Where is, oh, the pencil anota. Ah, here I see it. Eraser, I got it. Ship. All done. Good. Cancella. Cancella, we don't want. That would have been a variant of doing it. Yeah. Okay, great. So, that's the Pasch axiom in this very stingy form. And, well, now it doesn't like it because I'm probably didn't eliminate the anota. Let's do cancella. Tutti I disegni, and let's see what we get there. Oh, no, it didn't succeed in doing that. Okay, but I still have this thing. I still have the anota, and I want to get out of the anota. Which one should I do to make it forget about it? Termina, no. This, I should double click it, right? This, no, it's, it forgot, no, it didn't forget. It didn't forget, did it? I'm sure it didn't. No, it still has it. See, I'm still with this thing.
You need to get rid of this geometry, which is...
Yeah.
If you want the mouse, it's the first one. Yes.
Okay. And now it forgets about everything. Okay, it forgot about it. Thank you very much. So, lower dimension axiom just means that there are 3 non-collinear points. Upper dimension axiom means that if you have 2 points, yeah, let's do that. Perhaps I'm better now with getting rid of it. So, anota. Will it do it? Yeah. Okay, let's see now. I'm doing this by hand. So I have 2 points. These are the U and the V. And I have a point here, A, and here B, and here C. And they have the property that they're equidistant from these 2. Then the 3 points are collinear. Okay? Yeah? So it's so-called Leibniz's definition of a line. Now cancella tutti i disegni, the simple way, and this. Beautiful. I learned. Good. So that's all there is. This is the basis on which the whole talk is. So this is in the background. We don't change any of this stuff. Okay? Good. Next. Why does he want to do next? Huh? Well, something went wrong. Mouse. Okay, now it likes it. Okay. Who knows what. Now, as I said last time, Wolfgang Peas in 1961 provided an algebraic characterization of the models of the theory just seen, right? Given that the theory you've just seen originates in the first three groups of axioms of Hilbert, these are called Hilbertians. Something went wrong. I have this hand, which is not really what you want to have in life, right? So what do we do to get rid of the hand as well? No. I still have the hand, yeah. What do you do to not have a hand?
Click on the screen.
Yes, I click on this screen. Yeah, but then it's always this way. And this way gets more. Okay, so I'm gonna do that way because I don't know how to do it else. It's not ideal, but it's better than nothing. Okay, so now we're gonna go down. So down means what? This Euclidean parallel postulate is a very strong statement. We're gonna weaken it systematically. A more modest way of expressing Euclideanity is by saying that there is a rectangle, or that the sum of the angles of every triangle, or just one triangle, is 180. Usually people think that this is equivalent to the Euclidean parallel postulate. That's not true at all. Why? Well, why technically is because you can get a model that satisfies of absolute geometry that satisfies axiom R, but doesn't satisfy axiom P, the parallel postulate. But more in words, it's because this is a local property. If you look around yourself, you would realize whether your world is Euclidean in the sense of the axiom R. And you can see if you have rectangles and triangles and so on that sum up to 180. All of these are local properties. The parallel postulate speaks about the global structure of the universe. It says that these two lines that the sum of those two angles that Euclid is speaking about could be very slightly less than two right angles. In that case, the intersection would be really much farther than the galaxy in Andromeda. So we can't really check it. So it speaks about an incredibly global nature. And you can't capture that global thing by a little local statement that everybody can check in their room. Okay, so this can be expressed as a pure equidistance axiom, both as an purely existential statement and as a purely universal statement. The universal statement would say that perpendicular raised on the sides of a right triangle form a right angle. Let's try again the pictorial aspect of the world. Okay, so it says that if this is a right angle, and I raise here a perpendicular, and there a perpendicular, then here it is also, they intersect and it's 90. Okay, that's a universal statement. Okay, you can make this into a universal statement in terms of equidistance. Let's go back to mouse. Okay, and now, no, it didn't take it. Okay, now Okay. So Max Dehn in 1900 answered the question that Hilbert posed and showed that the rectangle axiom is strictly weaker than the Euclidean parallel postulate. In 2021, a paper that I co-wrote with my student Celia Schaff, we showed that there is no statement sigma in terms of the betweenness predicate alone, such that R would be equivalent to that. We've seen that the parallel postulate can be expressed as a pure incidence, or a pure betweenness statement, and as a pure equidistant statement. Well, it can't, R can't be expressed as a pure betweenness statement. So if your language contains only B, then you can make any statement you want, none of them will be equivalent to R. So you can't replace it with something that is not metric. It is intrinsically metric. Now, another existential statement that is equivalent to R, which has a certain distinction that it can be expressed in terms of collinearity and the midpoint relation alone. And in fact, with the smallest amount of midterms, of midpoints that you could have, namely 4, was proposed by Maria Teresa Calazzo in a paper in 1971 su una teorema di Jelmslev sulla geometria assoluta. And it states that in any triangle OAB, the following points, so if I have a triangle OAB, and N is the midpoint of OA, and N is the midpoint of OB, so we have 2 midpoints, and C is the midpoint of AB, and P is the midpoint of NN, then OP and C are collinear. In reality, they're more than collinear. P is midpoint of OC, but she doesn't ask that. So it's the least amount of midpoints that you can use in any statement that would be expressed only in collinearity and midpoint and would be equivalent to the rectangle axiom. Formally, it can be expressed as you see on the last line. So as you see, there are 4 N's and they imply an L. The form of this is called the Horn sentence. Why? Because if you write this sentence in its disjunctive normal form, then you would see that it has a bunch of negated atomic ones and a single non-negated atomic formula. That's precisely what Alfred Horn called in 1951 of great interest. This stuff interests a lot the computer scientists, these Horn sentences. Okay, so, and in a paper with Rolf Struve, we've shown that this statement, by Maria Teresa Calazzo, is equivalent to the rectangle axiom in much weaker systems than of absolute geometry than the one that I wrote earlier. In fact, in systems that contain just no order at all, just some congruence or some blind reflection with very few axes. So now you may ask yourself this, okay, now we found out that the rectangle axiom is weaker than the parallel postulate. Usually you want to, when you see something like this, at least Olaf Hellman, for example, in 1935, thought that we should split axioms whenever possible. That an absolutely simplest axiom system is one where none of the axioms can be split further. So here you would say, well, if R is weaker than P, then why don't you tell me what do I need to add to R to get P? I mean, you could say, the question is stupid. You could add R implies P. Yeah, but R implies P looks like an awful thing. It doesn't look like an axiom. It's logic gibberish, right? Moreover, Hellman made sure that you're not allowed to use that kind of thing. Why? You say that something is a missing link. So alpha in our case would be a missing link between R and P. If you have that P is equivalent to the conjunction of the two. Alpha obviously is weaker than P, right? And it is not true that R or alpha is true already in absolute geometry. If your alpha had been R implies P, then this would have been true because R implies P is not R or P. So you have R or not R or P. Well, that's already, the first part is already tautology. So you want to avoid those. Huh? So these are splittings. And you can't, though, define splittings purely logically. There is a taste moment that comes into it. In other words, you want this alpha to be a geometrically meaningful statement, something that if you present to people, they say right away, yeah, this is an axiom. This is something that's decent. Our definition can't do that. So it's an art, in other words, to find missing things. Now, before telling you what the missing link is, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the history of it. The missing link is Aristotle's axiom. This is a very little known axiom, although it shows up on the heavens of Aristotle. And well, it's kind of long and intricate. You have to think hard of what he's saying here. He says, the following arguments make it plain that every body which revolves in a circle must be finite. So far, so good. If the revolving body be infinite, the straight lines radiating from the center will be infinite. But if they are infinite, the intervening space must be infinite. Intervening space, I'm defining a space beyond which there can be no magnitude in contact with the lines. This must be infinite. In the case of finite lines, it is always finite, and moreover, it is always possible to take more than any given quantity of it. So that this space is infinite in the sense in which we say that number is infinite, because there exists no greatest number. Now, happily enough, we have a much simpler version by Proclus in his commentary on the first book of Euclid's Elements. He says, to anyone who wants to see this argument constructed, let us say that he must accept in advance such an axiom as Aristotle used in establishing the finiteness of the cosmos. If from a single point, two straight lines making an angle are produced indefinitely, the interval between them, when produced indefinitely, will exceed any finite magnitude. I'm going to put it in an exact geometric form, so we don't have that many words. So I have an acute angle, OXY in the picture. And somebody gives me a segment AB. The axiom says that I can find a P and a Q. The P is on OY, the Q is on OX, such that PQ is perpendicular to OX, and PQ is greater than whatever you gave me, the AB. So in other words, the distances that you can form this way between the legs of those of the angle exceed any given quantity. Okay? That's Aristotle's answer. And that's the missing link between R and P. Now, an equivalent form of it, which Marvin J. Greenberg in 1988 called a corollary of it, and he could prove that it follows from Aristotle's axiom, but he couldn't prove the other way. I did it in 2019. Is this: if you have BA perpendicular to this theta, and somebody gives you an angle, VUW, then there is a point, probably far away on theta, such that the angle BCA, the angle here, how do you do that? Well, I have to take this. I don't want to do it, but who knows else. So the angle here, yeah, is less than this one. Yeah? So you're given just AB and theta. It says that there exists this C far away so that this is less than that. And these are equivalent. This form and the form you've seen before are equivalent given the absolute geometry. Now we have to go to mouse. Okay, now we're fine. Now, how can we understand this axiom, the Aristotle axiom? First, you can think of it as some elementary form of the Archimedean axiom. Why? Well, the Archimedean axiom says that if you give me two segments, then an equimultiple of the first will be longer than the second. Well, we know it can't be expressed in first order logic for several reasons, the easiest of which is that if you have already absolute geometry, then you have a field somewhere. And if that ordered field is Archimedean, then every Archimedean ordered field is a subfield of the real numbers, which means it is bounded in its cardinality by the cardinality of the continuum. But we know by the Lippmann-Smolin theorem that you can't have a first order theory that has an upper bound on the cardinality of its models. So, if the Archimedean axiom holds, then so does the Aristotle's axiom. How can you see this? Here I have the explanation, but perhaps the best thing is to draw a picture again. Let's go for the this thing. Okay. So I have an angle here. Okay, and I want to get a long distance here. Okay, well, first of all, I start with whatever point I want here, and I have this. Then, through some hard work, I can show in absolute geometry that I can always find a point here so that this is at least twice as big as this. Okay? Now, if you can show that, then you can do twice as big as this, so you can get powers of 2. Okay? The Archimedean axiom tells you that, well, these, the powers of 2 times this, or the original one, will eventually exceed any given quantity, and you're done. Now, oddly enough, showing this thing is not an easy thing. I mean, showing what thing? That if you give me here a segment, then I can find a point here so that this segment is twice as big, at least twice as big. You would expect that there is a synthetic proof, and I expect that there was one as well. I just could never find it. So how did I prove it? By using Payas's algebraic characterization. Okay? Great. Let's erase this stuff. Let's get rid of this. No, this mouse thing. Good. Now, no, not this way, this way. In fact, the Aristotle's axiom holds even if you have a very weak form of the Archimedean axiom. Namely, Wolfgang Rautenberg in 1968 proposed an elementary axiom schema that looks like the stuff here. And what does it say? It says that if A is a subset of the universe of a model A, is a definable set of points, the definable in the sense that definable by this P, containing the distinct points P and Q, and such that whenever PQ is congruent to RS, that went on below it, yeah. If and only if S is in A, it gives you a point T. See, it says, I mean, the way you can think of it is that it says that you have a set A that whenever it contains 2 points and you have another segment that is congruent to this and the first one of these points is in A, then the S has to be in A as well. So if I have this PQ here and I have R in A and RS is congruent to this, then S must be in A as well, and vice versa. If S is in A, then PQ and RS are congruent. So in other words, it's a way of saying first orderly, then I take this and put it over and over and over, but you can't really say it. And what it says is that this thing goes past any point. For example, T here. T was some point on this line on which PQ was. And it says that any such set that satisfies this will eventually, there will be a V that goes past T. Yeah? So even with this, if you have just this, you can get Aristotle. This I showed in 2009. Oh, now it works. Oh, okay, well. Another way to think of the Aristotle's axiom is to think that it is a weaker version of the parallel postulate, because it clearly works in the presence of the parallel postulate. How? Well, let's again try painting here. So I start with this angle, yeah? And I want somebody gives me some AB, which is say this, and I want to find something here that is bigger than this AB. Okay, make AB longer. Let's say double it. Now take the double of it here and raise a perpendicular. Well, that's not nice. Let's try by hand. Cancella what? No, this has to be done by the eraser, sorry. Okay, now let's go back to the this, okay? And let's try by hand. So I'm gonna put here this twice, yeah? Now raise a perpendicular here, okay? Since you are in the presence of the Euclidean parallel postulate and you know that these two, this and this are parallel, this cannot be parallel. So it must intersect this, right? So here you have the point where you have, twice. Yeah? So you can think of it as, a weakening of the parallel postulate. Not everything is done this. Okay. So as I said earlier, AR is the missing link between R and P. Now, a further weakening of P, which is even weaker than the rectangle axiom, is the Lagrange axiom, which was introduced by Friedrich Bachmann in 1964. I use the German name because I don't see a good translation into English. It would be way too long. It would be the axiom of the intersecting perpendiculars. If you want that, we don't go by that. So I'll call it from now on just L. What does it say? The perpendiculars on the sides of a right angle intersect each other. So remember, R said not just that they intersect, but that the angle there is 90. L just asks for them to intersect. An equivalent formulation, which is in the same paper by Bachmann, is that through any point inside a right angle, there is a line which intersects both legs of the angle. So as you see, the Lorentz version that we had in the beginning said that this is true for any angle. If you take any point in the interior of an angle, then there is such a line. This says just for right angles. Okay? And Bachmann showed that you have this tree sequence, which is strict. In other words, none of the reverse arrows are true. This axiom, although Bachmann was the first to analyze its strength, does show up earlier. Namely, Saint-Marie in 1870 stated exactly this form and found it to have a form which is close to the one chosen by Euclid. To critique an attempt to prove Euclid's fifth postulate by Jules Carton, which was about to be published in the Compte Rendu of the Académie des Sciences by Bertrand, but wasn't by the intervention of Darboux and others. An even earlier mention of it came by no less than Lagrange. Usually this is stated as an embarrassing moment for Lagrange. I like these embarrassing things. They're usually considered to be the trash bin of history, but I like to dumpster dive in the trash bin of history and to find gems. This is one of these gems. Namely, Lagrange, on February 3rd, 1806, went to the Institut de France and claimed that he proved the Euclidean parallel postulate. This was a quite later date to make such a statement, to say nothing by such an illustrious person. His reasoning was, and the form of his axiom was that, the axiom, I'm making it an axiom. He didn't say it's an axiom. He said that these things are obvious, obviously. What is obvious? Well, he was thinking in these terms. You see the line B here. Yeah, the line B here is if you think of this as the particular parallel, there's one parallel from P to G that you can draw in all absolute geometries. You drop the perpendicular from P to G, and then you raise the perpendicular in P on that perpendicular, right? So let's do a little drawing. Where is the drawing? Here. Okay. So if I drop this perpendicular, and then raise this here. Yeah? So this kind of thing is always parallel. And Lagrange thought, suppose there is another parallel, this A, that comes like this, There's no reason why this would be parallel and its reflection in B wouldn't be, because of symmetry reasons. Why, if that isn't the other, right? Well, now he generalized this and he said, well, A, B are now any two intersecting lines that are parallel to G. Then the reflection of one in the other is also parallel. That's not so clear anymore, because think of it now that the lines would be like this. You would take B and take its reflection in A. Then there is no real symmetry reason why you would believe that, because you already went lower, right? So the original one made sense. What does it matter if you go to the right or to the left? But this other one takes, some bite of it. Oh no, I have to mouse it. This is okay now. No. This stuff should go, okay. Okay, good. And this. Now, where do we find this story about Lagrange? He obviously, after he had the whole talk, he took his papers and said embarrassingly, well, something went wrong. But he realized after he made the thing that this thing isn't working that well. With the principe de la raison suffisante, which has been used by Archimedes and Leibniz and stuff. So the manuscript was never published. It's actually in an archive of the Institut de France. It shows up in Jean-Claude Pont, L'Aventure des Parallèles in 86. By Borgato and Pette, una memoria inedita di Lagrange sulla teoria delle parallele, il bollettino della storia delle scienze matematiche in 88, and by Judith Grabiner, why did Lagrange prove the parallel postulate in 2009? The equivalence between L and Lagrange's axiom was proved by me in 2009. One direction, I could do it synthetically. The other one, again, I had to rely on Peyas's algebraic classification of absolute planes. More equivalent forms. A fellow named Lippmann, who shows up in the Jahrbuch für die Fortschritte der Mathematik only through another book, the first volume of some thermodynamics thing, and else not at all, published in 1906 a booklet called die absolute Wahrheit der euklidischen Geometrie, eine kritische Untersuchung der Grundlagen der Geometrie. Beweise für die Wahrheit der Axiome und Postulate, insbesondere für die des parallelen Axiom 5 des Postulat Euclids. So, the absolute truth of Euclidean geometry, a critical essay, a critical analysis of the foundations of geometry. Proofs for the truth of the axioms and postulates, in particular for the fifth postulate. And here, he's one of the people that you usually make fun of. Oh, in 1906 to say such things. I mean, yeah, he's in good company. I mean, Frege said things that were as stupid. So he didn't think that non-Euclidean geometry was any good. So what was his so-called axiom? Well, it wasn't an axiom, it was something clearly true. Because as you see, he didn't want to prove it by means of other means. He just wanted to prove it out of thin air. And the thin air was this. If you give me any circle, then there is a triangle containing that circle in its interior. So what does that mean? That means you give me this circle, and I mean, my enemy gave me the circle, and I can find a triangle that contains it in its interior. Isn't that clear? Well, obviously it's clear. So whenever I see clear things like this, I think this stuff has to be equivalent to the Lochnik axiom. Why? So the rectangle axiom is something that looks like a theorem. It's something very exact. It tells you if this, then this is 90. Or if you look at Maria Teresa Calapso, you think that that's a theorem. So it's a very exact thing. The things that are equivalent to the Lochnik axiom are obvious things that are not as exact. This doesn't tell you something that looks like a theorem. This looks like a triviality, you know. Given you can do that. No, it seems like some. Well, when you see these, then my suspicion is stuff like this is equivalent to the Lochnik axiom. So, and we have more illustrious people saying the same thing, but without any stupid thing. I mean, this isn't that stupid because you'll see it's very useful. No less than Henri Lebec, in the very little known Bulletin International de l'Académie Yougoslave des Sciences et des Beaux-Arts in 1936 proves that the Euclidean postulate is equivalent to this. I mean, can be proved from this, obviously using the Archimedean axiom. So here he doesn't say that he gets things out of nothing. So it's a short, two-page note that went almost unnoticed. I mean, the first one was discussed in the Yahoo by Max Dale, who said, well, it's something, the guy that doesn't have any connection to reality. And the Lebesgue thing is just, one sees a simple notion that he did this. So what does he do there? Well, he says that if you give me any convex quadrilateral, then I can find a triangle containing it in its interior, which means things this time are looking like that. Yeah. So it's the same thing, only the figure is this time a convex quadrilateral. As you notice in this form, our axiom is a purely betweenness statement. There's no, the other one, because it speaks about a circle, obviously contains a symmetric notion, equidistance. This contains nothing but betweenness. So let's do the, okay. Go back to mouse, okay. So, what's happening here? Okay. There is a prehistory to these things, namely, writing to Wolfgang Bolyai on December 16, 1799 from Helmstedt, Gauss stated pretty much the same thing that Lippmann and Lebesgue would say, namely, but without specifying the shape of the object. He says, if one could prove that a straight triangle is possible, whose area would be larger than that of any given surface, so he speaks of larger than, I understand that you can put the original object inside. Then I would be able to prove the entire geometry completely rigorous. What does the last part mean? If you give me this, obviously with the Archimedean axiom, because in 1799 nobody doubted it, then I can get you Euclidean parallel postulate. That's what it means to prove the entire geometry completely rigorously. So the equivalences of the two forms, Lippmann and Lebesgue, with the Bachmann's form, say, of the Logschnitt axiom, were proved in a paper that I wrote with Celia Schacht in 2019. One more equivalent form, which was proved in 2017, is that in Euclidean geometry, if you have a non-incident pair of point and line, then you have you end up with a parabola like this. For the locus of all points Q that are equidistant from P and L. That's a parabola. Now, if you want the points for which the distance to L is greater than the distance to P, then you have this thing. Everything that's above it. Yeah? Now, everything that's above it doesn't contain any complete line. If you think of this property and you ask yourself, well, which absolute geometries have this property? Then it turns out, this I have to kill. Okay. Then it turns out that this is precisely those satisfying the Logschnitt axiom, L. So this and L is the same thing. So you can rephrase it as for any non-incident pair PL at any line H, there is a point Q on H whose distance to L is less than or equal to its distance to P. So no line can be completely in this upper part. There is also a universal statement equivalent to the Lagrange axiom. How did I know that there would be one? This was in my PhD dissertation. I knew because Bachmann proved that if an absolute plane satisfies the Lagrange axiom, then any submodel of it, so submodel that is a model of absolute geometry, must satisfy it as well. So it is hereditary. And we know from model theory that if you have something hereditary, then there must be an equivalent form that is completely universal. And here's the universal statement that I came up with. It's by no means clear how I came up with it or how you would come up with it. These are moments of crazy inspiration where you end up with this thing. In an isosceles triangle, the isosceles triangle that we're talking about is POO prime, with base angles of 45 degrees. So this is a right angle and this is a half right angle. The altitude to the base, which is PM, is less than OO prime. That's equivalent to the Lagrange axiom, and as you see, it's completely universal. It doesn't say that something must exist. Now, it is also true that Aristotle's axiom is the missing link between L and P. No synthetic proof is known. So I had again to use Pegas. This represents a splitting of P into two strictly weaker because the disjunction of the Aristotle and Lagrange axiom is not provable in absolute geometry. Okay, there is another weakening of L this time, which says there exists an angle such that from every point in its interior, there exists a line intersecting both legs of a given angle, not triangle. Okay, mistake there. So the traditional L says that the angle is 90. In fact, it can be shown that if you give me any angle that's not infinitesimally small or not infinitesimally close to two right angles, then that statement is equivalent to L. So the 90 degrees wasn't that important. The important thing was that it wasn't tiny or it wasn't huge. This axiom just says that there exists some angle, you would think a very tiny angle, for which this is true. And that is, here we have an even longer string of weakenings of the parallel postulate. None of the arrows go in the other direction. This can be expressed in terms of B alone as an existential, universal existential statement. And one can prove that there is no universal existential statement that would be equivalent to it. Again, this very weak statement, if you add it to AR, the A is the same as an L here. I mean, in some of my papers, our papers had a different number. There were two things, some was L and the other was A. But here we should think of it as an L. So it's just the axiom that we've seen previously. This L exists. So L exists and the Aristotle axiom are equivalent to P. Again, no synthetic proof is known. However, this is also true, which means that this is not a splitting. according to our definition of a splitting, this is not a splitting of P, since AR is equivalent over absolute geometry to this. If one adds the circle axiom to it, which means if I have a circle, let's do a little drawing. If I have a circle and a point inside it and one outside it, then the segment joining these intersects the circle. Yeah? So if you have this, then we have an interesting equivalence. There is a so-called hyperbolic parallel postulate for which I actually should provide a new picture, which says this. If I have a line, well, that line is not very nice. Let's do it by hand, it's better. So, line. What does it need? It needs this. Okay, good. Line L, point P. It says this, given a line L and a point P outside of it, then there are two rays, R1 and R2, which do not intersect L, such that everything in between them intersects L. This was stated by Hilbert in 1903, and he proved with it that you can get your hyperbolic geometry very nicely out of it. So, it turns out that if you add the circle axiom to the absolute geometry that we have, then this L exists, so this restricted version of the Lagrange axiom is equivalent to the negation of Hilbert's parallel postulate. And it's also true that in A, one of these is true, either the Hilbert parallel postulate or this. So you can't have a model where none of them holds. Now we come to a subject that is from last year, from this paper that I was referring to with my student Celia, is this. You can turn both L and Aristotle's axiom into purely incident statements. Perhaps for L, this is not so surprising because we had it already as a between statement in the version of the Beck's axiom, that if you have a convex quadrilateral, you can find the triangle that encloses. But the other one is even more surprising. So, one of the pure incident statements equivalent to the Lagrange axiom is given three parallel lines in the picture ABC. There exists a line in the picture G that intersects all three of them. This thing is equivalent to the Lagrange axiom. If you want to express it just in terms of line intersection, that's how it looks. And it's the simplest possible way of expressing it. So there's none with fewer quantifier or simpler quantifier complexity or whatever. I mean, we've shown all that. Another version is that there exist two lines such that any line intersects A or B. Okay? So there exist two lines, think of them as, such that any line intersects one or the other. Again, purely incidence statement. In formal terms, it looks like this. We could prove it synthetically that this ML, which means meeting line, so there is a meeting line for any three parallels, is equivalent to L. Using Payas, we have shown that the other version that says you have two lines such that any line intersects one on the other is also equivalent to L, but not synthetically. There's also a universal statement in the language of line intersection, which says if the lines A1, A2, and A3 are pairwise parallel, then there is a permutation ijk of 1 to 3, such that any line which intersects A1 and AJ also intersects AK. So you can think of them this way. Now, the three lines are parallel, right? Then this says that there are two outer lines, the AI and AJ, such that if anything intersects the outer lines, then it would intersect the in-between line. Yeah? That makes sense. And you can express it in an even more general way in this just line intersection language as a universal statement. This statement is actually weaker than that, but you can show that the two are equivalent. Now, what about Aristotle's X? How can you get that? Well, this requires an even greater imagination that is not at all given by the statement itself. And it says this. Let's see the picture. There's a picture somewhere here. This is what it says. Somebody gives you little a, the line below, and there's a point on it. Outside of this line, there are two intersecting lines, M and N. The axiom says that there is a G, a line G that goes through P, intersects M, but not N. As you see, it doesn't seem to be at all inspired by the original version of Aristotle's axiom. It's a crazy statement on its own. There's no clear reason why you would even think of this. So, now, the first question would be, what about this statement asks for existences, right? And given this and this, there exists this that has things. Can you express it in a simpler way? It's in fact what statement? You have for all of these, there exists this. So first of all, there exists the point here. And then there is no point here because you have to say it's not intersecting the other. So how do you say it? Well, for all points on this, oh, I lost that one. Okay, so you would say for any point here, right? Any point here will not be on this. So you have for all this stuff, the original given stuff, there exists this point, let's say, or the line, if you have lines in your thing, such that for any point in N, it's not going to be on G. So you have a for all, there is for all. And the question is, well, can you express it without this complexity? And the answer is no. There is no universal existential statement, little sigma, that would be equivalent to this S. S being this. So in other words, the form you're seeing it is the best you can do in this language, in the language of just collinearity. Now, how do you show that this is equivalent to S? By heavy reliance on this. We know no synthetic proof of this. There is an even more restricted version of S, which is still equivalent to Aristotle's axiom. This says that if you go back to the picture, you're given again an A, and again an M and an N that intersect. But this time you don't have any P on it. And you're saying there exists just one line that intersects A and M, but not N. Just one line, not for any point here. Just one line that does this job. If that's true, then Aristotle holds. What's here? Yeah. And here is how it looks like in this formal way. One might say, I don't like something about the axiom S. What is it? If you look at it, it speaks about something that doesn't exist at all in the Euclidean setting. Namely what? Well, it speaks about these m's and n's that are not parallel to A. So it speaks about the kind of hyperbolic wall. Whereas Aristotle's axiom didn't seem at all like being about hyperbolic things. It looked like an absolute thing. I mean, you give an angle, and then you can make this as long as you want. So why does this look so specifically, hyperbolic? Well, that criticism can be solved because S exists hold without both parallel to A. So you can go to this and say this: given A, M and N's that intersect, no other thing mentioned. Yeah. Which is perfectly valid everywhere you want. I mean, anywhere you want, you have two lines like this. Then there exists a G that intersects A and intersects M, but not M. And that version is not at all specifically hyperbolic. It's as nice as you want. Now, P is thus equivalent to the conjunction of anything equivalent to L and anything equivalent to the Aristotle axiom. So ML, L this, S, you can put S exists in this extended version. Anyway, no synthetic proof of any of these equivalences is known. When we express S in terms of this ternary collinearity relation alone, we got a for all there is for all statement, as I mentioned. We've seen that you can't get a for all exists in terms of collinearity only. But what if you throw in much more? What if you throw in congruence and line intersection and all that? It's still not possible. Yeah. So even if you throw in everything, you can't do it. And that's what? Is it all? Yeah. That's kind of it. And yeah. Yeah. So even if you throw in, not in just the terms of collinearity predicate alone, even if you throw in everything, congruence, line intersection, which contains some existential thing, you can still not do it. And that's about it. And each of these forms, ML, L exists for all, is the simplest way you can put it in a certain formal quantifier sense. So you can't do it with fewer quantifiers, you can't do it with another form of quantifier and all that stuff. Everything is proved in that sense. And that's the story about the parallel postulate that wouldn't have existed had the Archimedean axiom being true. And that's all I have to say, and wait for your questions.
Questions? I have just curiosity. Returning to your first current part of your first lecture, when you say that we have no synthetic proof for any of these,
yes,
right? For you, meaning for your point of view, these are genuine challenges for mathematicians, or in a certain sense, okay, they are challenges for foundational studies, but not for mathematicians, strong side.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's embarrassing that we're there, and obviously, given the completeness of first order logic, we know for sure that there is an axiom, that there is a proof. automatic theorem provers are, I think, too weak to do anything in this area. So I don't know if we'll live to see any of these things. Actually, these proofs, but they're not that specific. As I said, absolute geometry is almost catastrophic in this sense. If you try to write a textbook in absolute geometry and to prove simple things in it that you know are true, you couldn't do it. You couldn't do it synthetically. You couldn't do it elementarily because we don't know. I mean, we know those things are true because you can do, you know, some chaos thing. But to prove any simple thing about these, for example, I set out some time, you know, a long time ago with my student, Celia, to show that something which was clear, which should clearly be true in absolute geometry actually is. And it turned out to be something extraordinarily hard with many lemmas, and the statement was a very simple one. It was the core statement of Euler's inequality. Euler's inequality says that the radius of the circumscribed circle is greater or equal than twice the radius of the inscribed circle. But if you want to say it really geometrically, you would say this: of all the triangles inscribed in a given circle, the one with the greatest radius of the inner circle is the equilateral one. So this is the statement that we try to prove in absolute geometry. Why do we think it's true there? Because you would think that things that have to do with optimization and so have nothing specifically Euclidean about them. So you'd think that any such thing works, but it takes an enormous amount of inspiration and work to prove this. And this is a happy outcome because most things that you think about, you have no idea how to proceed. Although it's clear that the thing is true, you can even prove it in chaos that it's true. How to transfer those into the synthetic realm is not at all clear. You would say, but can't we go by? I mean, okay, Bachmann had a representation theorem showing that all these models are going to algebra. Can't we go somehow by that route and find? Theoretically, sure. But in practice, it would be overwhelming. We as a human being cannot do that. It would be way too hard. So all of absolute geometry is plagued by this problem, which shows you that all our proofs in Euclidean are fake. They're not for the right reasons. They're for the wrong reasons. And the right reasons are obscure. We don't know why things are true. And as I said, this simple thing, you would think, what's simpler than saying you have an angle and you give me here a segment, and you want somewhere to get one that is more than twice this. Why can't we do it with, you know, laying off something and things? I don't know. We should be. I couldn't. No.
Yeah, it is a question from the ignorance gallery. I recall from Hilbert School on Lagrange that he has a few axioms, and then he says, well, if you add this, you get Euclidean geometry, if you add this, you get elliptical geometry, and so forth. And I was wondering, so these axioms that all these geometrical theories have in common, how would they relate to your absolute geometry?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, as I said, in Hilbert, you have these first three groups of axioms that contain statements that are, let's say, absolute. I mean, the first one is incidence, which in the two-dimensional case is kind of trivial. Then come the order axioms. Those, the way they are stated, exclude elliptic geometry, because in elliptic, you need a 4-point separation. You know, you need to say that these two pairs are separated. You can't say this is here because you have to think elliptic as if you were on a circle. It's not clear what it is that this is between those two. So you have the second group, and the third group is the axioms of congruence, which just say, you know, things like side, angle, side, and that kind of stuff, that you can lay off an angle and that kind of thing, which is nothing specifically Euclidean or not. So, and then he says, yeah, from here I can go this, I can do this, or I can do that, and I can show that everything I add is necessary, because I could add the negation of that and get something else. So, yeah, so the absolute geometry would be something that you would think is something on which we all agree in a certain sense, that it doesn't have this global statement that parallel postulates make, whether it's the Euclidean or the hyperbolic one. So it's something that we, in our finite experience with what we know, we think that we have a geometry with order and free mobility. And the chapter, the third group, is about free mobility, that you can move things around. And this we think we have an experience of. And we think we have an experience of betweenness as well, that things are ordered, that there is an upper and a lower, you know, that heaven is not hell or something like this. And so we have all this that makes us believe that there is no real debate about that. That kind of every geometry should be probably some subset of this absolute. Obviously, Bachmann went further and got rid of a lot. No more order, no more free mobility, even a more bare bones absolute geometry. So yes, you can go further and create an even more general geometry. But absolute is, in a certain sense, you know, but the idea, Janos Bolyai's idea, was a very good one, because much more than just studying the Euclidean or hyperbolic geometry is to study this general geometry that we can all agree on. And so introducing this notion, I think, is essential. And so yeah, I mean, that's what you do. You start with that and you go to different versions. And as I said, you can go even more restrictive, but what I've shown here is that if you have this basis, you have a lot of options to go below Euclidean while not accepting hyperbolic in its full force. Yeah. No?
Valentin Durango, the question to you. Valentin, please.
Hello.
Oh.
Hi. Thanks. Very nice lecture. Actually, I didn't have a specific question to ask. I only wanted to know if the slides will be made available somewhere, because I would like to look at some details before I could ask more meaningful questions.
Yeah, this is something that Pierluigi knows much better. I mean, whether these things will be available with the sound and whatever. I mean, just these things I can send them to you, but that's, I think there will be a place where the whole thing will be available.
No, I meant only the slides, not necessarily the recording, because the slides I can read in my own pace.
The slides, you should send me an email, perhaps.
Okay, I'll send you an email.
Easiest way of doing it.
Yes, thank you.
Yes. 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 Okay.
Another question. Adam, please.
Yes, hello.
Hello.
Thank you for your lecture. You mentioned the free mobility notion,
Yes.
and I encountered this in the literature, but I wasn't sure what it means and how to formalize it. Can you say something more about it?
Yeah, the idea of free mobility in general is that you can take an object from one place and move it into the other place of your realm of discourse. So suppose you have a line and a half plane determined by it, And well, can you find another line and another half plane determined by that? Is there an isometry of the space which moves this line and this half plane into the other one? So that kind of thing, it's an idea of homogeneity of your world, that it's not that everything you experience locally, everyone else experiences the same way.
Okay, thanks. But is there any history behind it? Can you say something more about who mentioned it and so on?
Helmholtz certainly has something to do with it. And later in the 20th century, there were many papers on this. There's a paper by Wang in 1951, I think, in the Annals of Mathematics, showing you that if you have some kind of a free mobility, then you get one of the three classical geometries. So it's a very strong condition, that if you impose it on some kind of a manifold with some things, then you already get one of the three geometries. So it's essential for that thing, I think. The question would be, why is hyperbolic or elliptic a natural geometry? Why aren't they just pathological counterexamples to just show the independence of the Euclidean, the independence of an axiom? And the answer would be exactly free mobility. So if you go from a group theoretic setting, and you have enough there, a little topology and a little group theory, and you're asking that the thing would have free mobility, then you get already one of the three geometries. So there is no other one. And so in this sense, if that's what you think your experience of the world is, then all the three are equally justified. There is no preferential nature to Euclidean geometry. And so in that sense, I think it's an essential quality. And as I said, in the 50s and so these things, there was also the Riemann-Helmholtz-Lie space problem that also has to do with this. So there was a very active literature on this. There's a little book by Freudenthal which gathers all of this in a publishing house that has kind of disappeared. In the meantime, I think it's in Darmstadt there used to be these series which doesn't exist anymore. The Wissenschaftliche Buchgesellschaft. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions? Okay, thank you, Victor, for the talk. And next lecture will be next Thursday at 9 o'clock. And thank you, everybody, and see you next Thursday. Bye.